hope you've gained some new insights after watching our video, The 5 Lessons of Top Change Leaders. If you haven't seen it yet, I've put the link in the description. I think you'll agree with what others have said. It's a game changer for understanding how to create success on enterprise projects. As a follow-up, I want to expand on lesson number 1 so you can put the information to work right away on your projects. Before I begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel to get more tips on leading organizational change. All right, let's get started. Lesson number 1 is it's all about the relationships. Top change leaders have found that the most important contributor to their project's success was managing organizational relationships. This makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Yet it's often the opposite of our experience with enterprise change, especially technology projects. You know what I'm talking about. The tech firms, well, they talk a lot about cutting-edge technology and all the bells and whistles that will provide revolutionary data analysis and insight to help you take your business into some modern future. The implementation consultants tell you that it'll be fast and easy to set it up because they've got magical methodology, best practices, and a little pixie dust that their experts will use to make sure that the implementation is a snap. They tell you they've done this thousands of times and know your industry and business. It all sounds like a dream. But here's what we forget. Our organizations are filled with good, hard-working people that have been keeping the machine running with duct tape and chewing gum. They aren't necessarily happy with the status quo. They know the shortcomings of the existing technology, but they've created workarounds and supplementary tools to make sure to get the job done. And our managers have hired people and built trusted teams who know how to gather the inputs and produce the outputs that are required. And this isn't just happening in isolated departments. It's happening all across our organization. And it's been happening for years, however many years since our last big change. And that's what we overlook. That's what we overlook with the logic of whatever slick change is proposed. So of course, success is all about relationships. It's all about how we engage, influence, navigate, and manage the long-established relationships that we've hired and developed and rewarded for keeping the status quo of our organization operating. The change won't happen without them. And that's why they're the most important factor for our success. But since this is about creating change, it's not like managing relationships in our regular day-to-day job. It's a targeted and strategic approach to relationships because we have a limited time frame to get people on board with the initiative. And in the compressed time frame of a project, we have to make sure stakeholders are committed to the success of our initiative, that they are aligned with other stakeholders, meaning that there's general agreement with the problems that need to be solved, the solutions represented by our project, and the plan to achieve those results. And most importantly, we have to understand what we need to achieve for them to sustain their commitment. This point's essential, and we'll talk more about it in a moment. So how do we do this? How do we make sure our projects make it all about relationships? Here are 3 concrete action steps. It's really quite simple. First, identify the stakeholders that are important to our project. Next, understand their thoughts, needs, and recommendations. And then finally, build those recommendations and their participation into our project plan. And for those of you who are project managers needing tangible deliverables, there are 4. A stakeholder assessment, a stakeholder tracker, most often a spreadsheet, a stakeholder management strategy and plan, and then finally, a business readiness strategy and plan outlining the business changes required so that the technology and the operations work together. Keep in mind, though, that as always, the deliverables are of secondary importance to the actions you and your team take to manage relationships. They're simply a tool to help the team learn and collaborate. I'll go through this now in more detail. Our first step is to identify the stakeholders that are important to the project. This step is important so we have a clear and articulated picture of the stakeholder landscape. In other words, this helps us understand who will be impacted, who needs to be engaged to make decisions about the changes. What are the networks of influence that may affect stakeholder perceptions and decisions? In other words, we not only need to identify the stakeholders, we need to understand who might influence them to support or not support our project. Identifying stakeholders starts by understanding our project goals. What are we trying to accomplish both tactically and strategically? As an example, our tactical goal might be to implement a new recruiting software, while our strategic objective might be to reduce time to hire, the amount of data entry required and associated costs with that, and finally to put more control in the hands of hiring managers. This also might be a way to reduce overall HR staff costs. Understanding both sets of goals gives us a complete picture of the potential project impact. With that understanding, we can proceed to the next step, evaluating how the path to achieving the goals will impact people. This includes both a functionality impact, like how the change will require an end user to use a new tool, as well as an operational impact, how the change will impact elements of the operation, such as process, roles, reporting relationships, or information flow and control. Operational impact is much more critical to project success because it's often the source of the greatest conflict during a project. And that's because it's about organizational turf. Ineffective management of the operational impact can affect the solution functionality and the quality, customer satisfaction, and as a result, stakeholder commitment. So an early stage assessment of impact provides the best foundation for managing relationships, or really, managing the risk that relationship issues or turf issues will negatively impact the project. It also helps us understand the role stakeholders may need to play in our project. Some might have knowledge of the details and will need to be brought in into the project as subject matter experts. Others are leaders who will need to make decisions or give approval of decisions. The process I'm describing here is really about beginning with the end in mind. When we understand what we're trying to accomplish and how it will impact people, we start to get a clear picture not only of which stakeholders will be affected, but also why they might push back against the project. We'll understand which organization groups are impacted, as well as which specific relationships will be essential to engage and manage. This includes the folks at the ground level who know how the work really gets done, as well as the leaders who will be shaping the future direction and will need to sign off on those changes. This also gives us insight into the networks of influence, the relationships our stakeholders have with one another, and how they may influence each other during the project. For example, it's important to know that the budgeting department will need to be engaged to weigh in on the new financial technology. But it's also important to know that they're influenced significantly by the division executives they support. So we'll need to make sure the executives are brought into the project process so they will not undo the work we've done with the budgeting team. So step one, identifying our stakeholders, gathering information on project goals, areas of impact, the stakeholders impacted, and the resulting roles that individuals and groups may need to play. This is the information required to complete our stakeholder assessment. Now we're done with step one. Step two is about understanding our stakeholders, their thoughts, perceptions, concerns, and recommendations. And that's about listening. Once we understand the stakeholders who are important to our project, now it's time to talk with them. Our primary objective is to get their perspective. We want to understand their thoughts about the project, of course, but more importantly, we want to understand what are their challenges they see in their operation. What are the problems they see as the priorities for any improvement effort? This is important because stakeholders will be more committed to our project if they believe we are solving the right problems. They become committed to the project's success because we're doing something for them. For example, an HR department I worked with wanted to improve their recruiting process by implementing new recruiting technology. A key objective of the project was to reduce the time it took to fill open positions. However, when we talked to key stakeholders both inside and outside of the department, we learned that the primary cause of the delayed process was that a financial policy required that all open positions get reapproved before a hiring process could begin. So while the technology would provide some efficiencies, we learned that if we didn't address the policy, the biggest root cause of the delays would remain unresolved. And as a result, both the technology and the HR department will continue to be perceived negatively. So in that example, we learned that to get full stakeholder commitment to the project, we needed to make sure we were addressing the whole problem, not just a part. We also learned more about who should help shape the solution and who needs to approve any changes. Before the stakeholder conversations, we thought we needed to get HR plugged in, of course, because it was their technology. We also knew we would need to engage line managers because they were a primary end user of that technology. What we hadn't realized, however, was that finance executives would be so critical to solving this major issue. With that understanding, we also knew we would need to tap the network of influence for financial executives, and that's the division executives, because without their influence, finance might not have been open to changing the policy. So we've identified our stakeholders by getting clear about the project goals and impact. That's step one. Next, we've listened to their thoughts, needs, concerns, and recommendations. And this has helped us identify additional stakeholders as well as key problems we'll need to solve, other goals, if you will, that will be required to gain stakeholder commitment. This becomes the data to formalize in the stakeholder strategy document and the stakeholder tracker. They should outline the stakeholder concerns, the plan for mitigating those concerns, and the process for their participation in the project. We also have the information required to put together a foundational business readiness document that will identify the preliminary operational concerns and the process for addressing them. Our final step is to build that information into our project plan. That's about doing three things. First, we're establishing the structure for engaging our stakeholders, the mechanisms of engagement or meeting types, document reviews, etc. We also establishing the structure for expanding our work to address the stakeholder concerns. For example, the core contracted project might be to configure and implement technology, but to make it work in the context of our operating environment, we have to address the related operational challenges identified by stakeholders. That work requires a structure. Finally, both of these structures are then built into the timelines and accountabilities of the project plan itself. That gives us the ability to manage the relationship work effort and understand our progress. And there you have it. We now have an actionable process for managing the relationships in our project. Of course, what I just outlined is just the starting point. Once the project begins, we can think of it as iterative. We conduct an assessment to identify goals, impacts, and the stakeholders who need to be engaged. We listen to get their feedback. We then build that into our strategy and plan. And then we keep assessing, getting stakeholder feedback, and so on through the initiative. Know that by engaging with stakeholders to understand their needs and then building that information into our approach and planning, we're creating a strong path to success. It's all about the relationship building that happens because of this process. It not only gets their commitment to our project's success, it guarantees that they see it as their project too. I hope this video has provided some insight to help you start putting the 5 lessons of top change leaders into action. If it did, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel to build your change leadership capability. We're always happy to answer your questions or discuss ways of supporting you. Reach out to our email address at letstalk@soleva.com.